Welcome to the Old Ottawa South Garden Club. The presentation is entitled Colour Through the Seasons, when Master Gardener and member of the Ottawa Valley Rock Garden and Horticulture Society, Rob Stewart, will focus on native and cultivated bulbs, grasses, vines, and evergreen and herbaceous perennials hardy to the Ottawa area that can introduce colour into our gardens throughout the year, irrespective of sun or shade. Gail, please introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February presentation of the Old Ottawa South Garden Club. The presentation is entitled Perennial Colors Throughout the Seasons, and our presenter tonight is Rob Stewart, who is in Maui and has graciously agreed to do this presentation, even though he's 5 hours different timing from us. Rob has been a gardener since the age of 10 when he started his first vegetable garden, and apparently that didn't work out the best, as any 10-year-old you can imagine didn't keep up the enthusiasm for the whole amount of time, so he ended up with a weedy disaster. He's been gardening over his lifetime with vegetable and flower gardens. And since 2003, he has focused on alpine gardening and is an active member of the Ottawa Valley Rock Garden and Horticultural Society. He takes full advantage of their annual seed exchange and has tried to grow most of his own plants from seeds, including trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals. Lately, he has explored other types of propagation via spores, cuttings, division, and layering. He has been in the Master Gardener program since 2016 and enjoys sharing his knowledge and experience and learning from others. So, Rob, I ask you to take it away and give us some beautiful color for this February night here in Ottawa.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Gail. As you mentioned, I am here in Maui, where the temperatures are about highs of 25, lows of 18. It's just gorgeous. But when I think back of Ottawa and I think of the gardening season coming to us shortly, I always get excited when spring rolls around. And this photo on the screen right now. Anyway, when I think of Ottawa and I think of springtime, it's just a wonderful invitation after winter. And although this winter has been extremely mild, there's still lots of surprises when the snow melts. The photo that you can see on your screens right now is a series of slices of a garden in Carlsberg Springs that one of the members of the Master Gardeners had in her yard when she lived there. And in the right-hand corner, we see spring and then summer, followed by fall and then winter. And one of the things that I'll be trying to show today is how you can take advantage of the plants that you plant and grow and allow you to have color in your garden throughout the year, even into the early stages of winter before we get too much snowfall. This color for garden belongs to Mary Van Berlo, whose picture of the garden on the first slide she's the owner of this garden near Maitland, Ontario. And if you've ever toured on the Thousand Islands and Rideau Canal Garden Trail, you may have gone through her gardens. But they're a massive color. They've got plants of different heights, different textures. It's a wonderful garden. And if you'd like to think of having your garden turn out in ways similar to this, what we're going to be talking about this evening, are ways to achieve that. So one of the first things that we talk about is layering and/or succession. This is where you have plants coming up through other plants early on, that are having a different bloom period, a bloom time, so that when one fades, another comes into prominence. And to do that, you need to select plants that have a long bloom period, or plants with a long season, and it's slightly different. And we'll get into that further into the presentation. The other thing that you need to consider is plants that will rebloom. And a lot of that has to do with deadheading. And that's something that will significantly help to cause plants that rebloom to continue blooming throughout the summer. We've also looked at texture and foliage so that you've always got something interesting to look at. And finally, we look at those big pops of color that will bring interest and color to your garden when some of the other plants have bloomed and are now, especially if they're spring ephemerals, will be hidden until next year. So when we talk about layering, we're talking about having different plants in your beds show up and flower at different times. And one of the things that you will notice in your own garden is that when you purchase plants at a nursery or big box store or whatever, quite often they have labels on as to the size, the height and width and time of when the plants will bloom. But one thing that we all need to be aware of is that our growing conditions are not necessarily the same as those that are on the plant that we've just bought. And so we always need to be aware of the color that we're seeing in our garden and be prepared to move plants around. It's especially difficult if you have a plant that was supposed to reach 4 or 5 feet in height, and you stuck it behind a plant that's 2 feet in height, and then find out that the plant that's supposed to be 4 or 5 isn't growing and you can't see it. I mean, one of the things you could do would be to dig it up and move it when it's blooming, but that's not usually a good strategy. And typically the better strategy is for spring blooming and early summer blooming plants. If you want to move them, you move them in the fall. And plants that bloom later in the year, you can move them in the spring. So that you need to always, I mean, especially now with digital cameras, it's a wonderful tool to take pictures of your garden and to see what's blooming when and where, and allows you to make those changes to continually improve your garden. Another type of layering is using bulbs and spring ephemerals with other plants. And we'll get to the next slide. We'll talk about a couple examples where this applies. And well, one of the things that's important is that if you are using bulbs in this manner, is that you plant them deep. Usually they suggest, I think tulips are 6 to 8 inches deep, but you can plant them deeper. And if you do plant them deeper, you can plant other shallow rooted plants on top. And in the spring, the tulips will still come up. And so you won't have those bare spots in your garden after the spring flowers disappear. And the other thing you can do is you can put in plants that are not heavily covered in foliage, in which case you can see through the plant into other parts of the flower bed, which also is another technique that really helps. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the type of layering with bulbs examples I'm showing here are with tulips and chrysanthemums on the left, and you can't see the chrysanthemums now. They're down here in the photo, but as the tulip bulbs or the tulip flowers fade and die, you'll cut the stems, but you'll leave the leaves there of the tulips to reinforce and rebuild the tulip bulb for next year. And while that's happening, the chrysanthemum will grow up, and before too long, the tulip leaves will have disappeared, and the chrysanthemum will cover that whole space, and you won't even know that the tulips have been there. Another very good example is using tulips with daylilies or emerald callus. And if you look closely on your screen, you can see the tulip leaves down here underneath the daylilies. And it's a similar type of thing where the daylilies will thicken up and spread during the late spring, early summer period, and will hide the yellow leaves of the tulip, and basically give you a better looking bed through that part of the year. You can also use these poppies. These are Papaver pineifolium. I'm not sure what the common name is, but it's an annual poppy, and here it's mixed with daylilies. And these annuals will bloom usually around the end of June, and shortly afterwards the daylilies will bloom. In which case, you've got this wonderful combination depending on the colors of the plants. But the idea is that you're taking advantage of this layering by, as the poppy degrades and dies, the daylily will cover over where those flowers grew. If you leave the poppies in place and only remove the dead plants, the portions of the dead plants in the spring, when they germinate, you can also continue this on through a period of time, and it'll be a good thing and cut down on having to decide what should go in this spot. Now, here's an example of what I forgot to mention at the beginning was that this presentation was put together by myself and another master gardener, Candace Dressler, and she lives out in, I think it's near Rothwell Heights, just off of Ogilvie Road near Montreal Road. So some of the pictures in here are mine, some of the pictures in here are hers. This is an example of one of her pictures. And this particular Graham cordifolia is blooming the 2nd of July. In the back, we've got against the house, you can see the downspout here of their eaves trough. But there's some valerian, there's some climbing hydrangea, there's some lavender that's in bloom, waiting to bloom. We've got some phlox. These are some phlox here and I believe over here, and ones that have already finished. In this particular is some peony. So by choosing the plants that fit, you can have a succession of bloom. Now here's that same bed at the end of September. So the cram has disappeared. It's gone down, and all the flowers have been cut off. The hydrangea at the back still has some color from the bracts of the hydrangea flowers. You can see up here in this corner here, you can see the Verbena bonaerensis, which is a very thin type of plant with lovely purple and I guess more mauve plants colors in their flowers than elsewhere. There's some Artemisia schmittiana here, and already finished, as I mentioned, was the lavender. It's been cut back, the cram, and what will be coming are the daylilies here, and it shows also up here some canna lilies. So this bed, 3 months later, is still showing color in the garden, and it reflects a well designed garden bed. Here's another bed in Candace's garden, and it's hard to see, but these are purple sensation alliums. And over here we've got some tulips. This is a Camperdown elm, and there are some Iris reticulata in the photo, but they're difficult to see. A couple months later, this is the same bed. You can see the dry remains of the purple sensation. This is now a big hosta some in substance, and there was some lamium that disappeared over the winter that came up, and it's filling this portion of the bed. So once again, you can see the layering effect by the correct choosing of various plants. Now this is a picture in my garden in the spring, and I've got some purple sensation up here in the corner. There's a yellow, a berberis, and a purple one, and this is a Tradescantia sweet Kate. Now you'll see it later in the presentation when it's covered with lovely blue flowers, but this yellow mimics the color of the yew bright gold, and also down here in the corner there are some Asiatic lilies. And what will happen as time moves on is that the daylilies here and this sweet Kate will help to cover some of the lilies that are in the forefront, and here in the back there are some daylilies as well, and they'll cover where the tulips are growing. So that combination of using early blooming plants with plants that will overgrow that location is one of the key ideas that I'd like to let you in on this evening. This is a different garden at Candace's, and these twirly stakes here are for helping to grow dahlias. She's got in this corner here, she's got a globe thistle. There's a number of different types of echinacea in here blooming. She's got some veronica, I believe, over here, and some Campanula carpatica, as well as in the back corner, she's got some annuals. So it's a combination of plants that bloom at different times, even including annuals. Now here's the same garden bed at the end of September, and Candace has cut down the globe thistle, but if you look carefully, you can see they have rebloomed. They're a lot smaller, but they are still there in the bed, and they're still providing some attraction. The dahlias, you can see them in here. They've been growing since the last photo in July, and they're now at probably their maturity, waiting to bloom. And you can't see them quite now because of the shot, as there are some other types of echinacea, prima donna, and fatal attraction, and there's also some lilies that we saw in the in the previous diagram, and I'll go back to that one. And these are these white lilies up here, and they've blooming, and they are blooming, but they've been covered by some of the other dahlias that are growing in the forefront of the picture. When we talk about plants with long blooms, what we're talking about is a plant that will bloom probably a good 2 to 3 months through the growing season. Now, some will bloom a little longer than others, but these plants generally flower for a long period of time, as opposed to when we get to it a little later about I'll get to it later. Sorry. But these ones here, and I'll go through those. Now, the first one is Corydalis ochloreuca, and it's a type of Corydalis. There are some that grow, such as Corydalis solida, that have a small tuber about the size of your thumbnail. This Corydalis tends to have a fiber root system, but it starts blooming early in the year, May 25th, and as it's still blooming here, October the 4th. So it's a plant that's worthwhile having in the garden, and if it's situated right, it'll provide you lots of color throughout the year. Now this one here is white. I think there are other ones that are the other types are different colors. This is Iris eximia, and it's similar to the previous Corydalus in the sense that it's blooming here on May 28th, and it's blooming still at the end of September. And obviously not as many flowers towards the end of September, but still providing some color into your garden. This Lorraine Sunshine is an interesting Heliopsis in that the leaves have some variegation where the white, it's whiter leaves with green veins. So you don't see it as much in the picture as in the first picture as maybe in the second, but it'll bloom from, as you can see, July 5th to September the 16th. And obviously you'll want to cut off the flowers once they're finished blooming each individual flower, but it still will be throwing up lots of buds over that period of time. The Phlox paniculata white eye flame is a very good phlox, garden phlox, and one of the attributes that it shares is its ability to, with the other plants in this part of the presentation, is its ability to flower for a long period of time. I know myself, I grow some phlox and not this particular one, and they don't last as long, but this one, as you can see, is a good, almost a good 3 seasons, if not more, of blooming. And when the flowers are done, as it progresses through the summer, you should make sure to cut off the dead blooms, and it will likely rebloom, depending on that you give it good water and it's fertilized well with the garden compost and those types of material, which release their nutrients slowly versus what you may get if you used a water-soluble fertilizer. Here's an example of the white-eyed phlox, and one of the things that to be aware of is this phlox is one of the few phloxes that are mildew resistant. That's one of the problems with some garden phlox. The majority, unfortunately, is that they're very susceptible to mildew. So if you plant them into your garden where there's not a lot of room for air to get through, or you plant it in a shady spot or a partially shady spot, you're likely to get mildew growing on them. Whereas putting it in a nice sunny spot where it gets plenty of air, that they should be fine. And the white-eyed phlox is an example of one that does well and has that resistance, along with the phlox David and Goliath. And here's an example. This is David on the left-hand side of the screen. We have the white-eyed phlox here, and these are Goliath. I believe these two are Goliath. This is just I'm not sure what this name of this one is, but Candace relates how when she was putting her beds together, the label on the Goliath said it would grow 6 to 7 feet tall. Unfortunately, it didn't. It only grew 4 feet, and therefore it was one of those plants that she had to move at the end of the growing season so that it would be in a better location so that you could see it when it was blooming. Other long blooming flowers are echinacea. This is a double pink. Now the doubles have I guess they're improved or hybrid or whatever, but unfortunately they don't provide nectar for insects and bees. And so just be aware of that. If you put them into your garden, they can be very useful. This one will bloom for a long time, as long as it's deadheaded. And here we have 2 examples. Once again, a little over almost 3 months, if not more, of it blooming. But just take that into mind that because it doesn't, because it's double, it doesn't provide the nectar that some of the other echinacea will provide. And here's an example of 5 different varieties. We've got the purpurea species here, which is your typical normal echinacea. You've got hot paprika, coconut lime, Cheyenne spirit, and prima donna, and they will all bloom at slightly different times, but they will bloom if they're deadheaded for a longer period of time than if you don't prune them or deadhead them. But one of the things that is useful to the birds is these 3 echinacea on the bottom all provide seeds that the birds like. Well, these 2 at the top, the hot paprika and the coconut lime, because they're doubles, they don't provide the nectar for the insects, and you know, they're attractive in their own way, but they don't do as much as for the wildlife in your garden. Rudbeckia is a wonderful plant. It blooms from August into early October, and it spreads a bit, but mostly through seeds. And it's a wonderful plant. It likes full sun and, you know, moderately moist, well-drained soil. And you can also leave the stems up on this one after it's bloomed, and it will feed the birds through the early part of the winter. I find in my case, where I have them in my garden, that after a few snowstorms, the stems get beaten down, and the value of providing the seeds is not as good as it was early in the season, or early in the fall, late fall before the snow flies. Chrysanthemumia is one of the hardy chrysanthemums, and this particular one that grows in Candace's garden was purchased around 2007 and is still growing strong. And you know, it's a lovely plant. It starts blooming in August, and it'll bloom through the end of July, and you might even get more blooms in September. But you know, it's, I guess in some of these, because I've bought the cuttings myself from the various horticultural societies, and some are a little more hardier than others. But if you get one like this that lasts and is hardy and has blooms for as long as Chrysanthemumia, you've certainly got yourself a winner, not a winter, excuse me. And here you can see it blooming still in November, obviously not as vibrant and exciting as in August, but then in November, there's not a lot of competition. So, but it's still nice to have those flowers. Other flowers, such as the sedum, which are now given the Latin name of Hylotephilum, Autumn Joy is one example, which is up in the corner. Neon and Lemon Jade, these start blooming probably in September, I would think, late August, September. And they're really really attractive to the insects. I guess one of the other features of these particular sedum is that they grow about maybe 12, 18 inches tall, you know, 30 to 45 centimeters. And they provide some structure in the garden in the early winter, but depending on how much snow we get, you might not be able to see them around this time of the year. Other plants that are long blooming are this particular Rudbeckia laciniata, which is a native, and it would grow about 1 meter to 1.5 meters tall, and blooms from June through to snow. And as long as you clip off the spent blossoms, it'll continue to bloom and add some color to your garden. And it also attracts birds who will eat the seeds later in the fall. Now here when I mentioned earlier on about long season as opposed to long bloom, an example here are the daylilies, Hemerocallis. Now individually, the flowers on each flower lasts only a day. but typically each plant, each species will have many stalks and many buds. So that individual plant will probably bloom for 7, maybe 2 weeks. And daylilies they're organized or have been divided into a number of different categories. There's early, mid-season, late, and if you combine plants from each of those categories, you can get your daylilies to be blooming for a long period of time or a long season. So they don't have to just disappear after a couple of weeks. You can get them to at least show for at least a couple of months, if not more. Here's an example of some of the colors that you can are available in the daylily plants. And so the variety of colors then allows you to selectively choose the ones that'll fit into your color scheme, or allow you to design your garden color in various ways that these plants can take advantage of by your purchase. Here are some other types, whereas I guess probably in the last 15 or 20 years, daylilies have come along that have different flowering characteristics in terms of the shape of the flowers. On the left, we have Bali watercolor, and on the right we have Final Touch, and you can see the variation in the bloom there. And on the next slide, Guanso is another different type of daylily flower. And one of the nice things is that we've gone from the beginning of July to the end of September with daylilies, and with the right and correct choice, you can have them for a long period of time. Reblooming plants, we're going to look at campanulas, salvia, and geraniums. And for these plants to rebloom, they must be deadheaded. But they can also be used for layering depending on the size of the plant. And I've got 2 or 3 types of campanula, which I'm going to show you. The first is Campanula carpatica, or Carpathian harebell. And this is a fairly low blooming plant, and is lovely. You can get it in white or mauve or slightly bluish flowered plants. The nice thing about this is if you shear the plant after they've bloomed, they will rebloom. And but you know, just to be aware that it's going to take a few weeks once you do that for them to generate new buds and new flowers. But you can get them to rebloom and add that color to your garden. If you are out shopping for this type of plant, one of the recent introductions is a variety by the name of Rapido. And it's a bit more prolific, it has more flowers, and it's a bit more uniform size. So it makes some things a little easier as far as design go. But they're all of the campanulas of this variety are all very useful. Now here's another campanula, Campanula punctata, or the spotted bellflower. And you can get a couple of flushes of bloom from this. It does do well in dry shade, and you know, it's one of the few plants that that like those conditions and will flower. Another campanula is Campanula persicafolia, which is the peach-leaved bellflower. This is because this plant reaches a height of about possibly even 1 meter in height. It's a good plant to use in your layering design, where you can have it at the back of your border, and it will grow up and bloom at a time when possibly some of the flowers that are blooming in the front of it will have finished, and you can use it to add color later in the season. Salvia. Now, salvias are quite interesting plants. They come in a variety of different shapes and sizes. So make sure that you, when you're looking to buy one, that you look at the label. And I know what I said about labels before, but it's still, it will give you some idea of the type of plant and the color. You can get white salvia, blue salvia, I believe even pink salvia. And if you cut these down to the flower stems down to the bottom, they will rejuvenate and bloom again throughout the summer. Veronica's is a similar shaped flower type plant, and it can be coaxed into reblooming by cutting off the blooms a section at a time, which would mean that you've got some early flowers, some late flowers, and some new buds occurring on the same plant. And they're very useful. Like they like full sun and a well-drained garden, but they also come in pink. Foliage, texture, and other methods of providing color to your garden are important because we all know that it's impossible to provide color continuously in the same location throughout the year. And so by having different shades of green and different textures, we can achieve a different effect, a better effect. Here's an example here in one of my gardens. Well, I've got some false Solomon seal up here that's I believe is blooming, some bleeding heart, and some Polygonatum bifolium, and those three are blooming now. But as time goes on, later in the summer, the bleeding heart will disappear. I've got a nice blue Hosta Cybolia hosta over here, and it will send up flowering stalks in late August, early September. I've got a shredded umbrella plant over here, which is it's the leaves that you like and not the flowers. But as time goes on, the false Solomon seal will have red berries, reddy orange berries. And so you'll always have some color in this portion of the bed, and some different textures of green and shapes. Plumenaria, or lungwort, sorry, is an interesting plant that it has flowers which are either blue or pink. Here's a pink one here. And I believe what happens is once the flower is fertilized, the plant flower changes from blue to pink. It spreads around gently within your garden. You can cut off the dead flower stalks after it blooms, but it'll still give you some color and texture throughout the summer, especially if you've planted it in a fairly dark, shady area. Here's another example where there was some layering. You can't see it right now because the maidenhair fern is grown over where some of the early spring ephemerals were growing. But you know, you've got the different leaf shape of the hosta. These are variegated yellow on the outside. I've got some Primula japonica, so with some white flowers in here. Some astilbe that will bloom white later in the summer. And for continuous color, I've also used some New Guinea impatiens that will help to provide continuous color in this bed. Most people purchase heuchera for the color of their leaves, and this example of marmalade is no exception. As most heuchera, they might bloom in red, pink, or white blooms, but it's usually not the blooms that we're interested in, it's the leaves. And this particular heuchera, which are quite hardy and will bloom in sun to semi-shaded locations, can add a lot to your fall colors as the leaves on the trees turn color, and some of the plant material dyes in yellow. So it's very useful in providing that fall color to your garden. This is a different foliage plant. It's a geranium that has burgundy blooms. And even when it's not blooming, you can see that the variegated leaves, which are slightly different in the sense you've got a dark spot and a white spot and the green leaves on the outside. But once again, it adds that little bit of texture, which can add value to your garden. Most of us are familiar with euphorbia and cushion spurge, but this particular variety is called bonfire. And what separates it is, you can see the photo here on May 24th, that bright, bright yellow. I forget the proper term that to describe. I think acidic yellow is probably a good term. Whereas by September, the leaves have turned reddish, and it, along with the heuchera and other plants, can add to your fall foliage display. It likes full sun and average soil and moisture, but it's interesting variation from the original cushion spurge. If you've got a dark spot in your garden, and this is an example in Candace's garden, she's got some nice white variegated hosta at the front, elbow marginata, and at the back she's got some bleeding hearts. But once the time goes by in the summer, the bleeding hearts will disappear, and the hosta will be what you see, the bright white lighting up the dark spot. One of the interesting things about hostas is there's very few of them that are scented. And in fact, there's only about 30, considering the fact that there's thousands of hostas available on the market, only about 30 of them are scented. And the first 3 that were available commercially are Royal Standard, Sweet Susan, and Honeybells. And you know, if you're looking to buy something and that shape and color fits, it's always a nice thing to add some scent to your garden. It adds that extra dimension beyond just what you can see with your eyes, or feel with your fingers. You can actually smell it, and it's a very pleasant smell. This particular garden is the garden of Mr. Budd from Budd Gardens in Blackburn Hamlet, and it shows a bed of a large variety of hostas. And you know, you can look at this and it's amazing, the different colors of the leaves, the different shapes. Some are variegated, some are yellow. So it's a very attractive garden. And I know that I had taken the Thousand Island Garden Trail a number of years ago, and there was one particular garden where the homeowner used hostas everywhere, and it was, even though it might sound boring, it was really very attractive. And the nice thing about the hosta is that they don't all bloom at the same time. They might, as I mentioned before, they might be scented. They might have white blooms or mauve blooms. So all in all, this type of garden is an excellent garden to view to get an idea of what these plants can look like in the garden. The other type of plant that's useful, especially in a shaded condition, are ostrich ferns, or ferns generally, I should say, as opposed to just the ostrich ferns. I mean, here we've got an example of some hosta in front of a bed of ostrich ferns, which will provide a nice leafy backdrop throughout the summer. One of the disadvantages of the ostrich fern are the fact that they spread fairly quickly, although not terribly fast. But it would introduce more work into your garden maintenance plan with them. But you can achieve basically the same effect by installing either the male fern, Dropoteris felix ma, or the lady, which grows to about 150 centimeters in height, or the lady fern, Anthurium felix femina, which grows to about 100 centimeters. And the advantage of those last two, the male and the female, is that they don't spread. They're a lovely fern that will stay in its place, and you can count on it for many, many years to be in your garden. Another plant which provides texture is this heartleaf oxeye daisy, and it likes full sun and has lovely daisy type of flowers. One of the interesting aspects of this plant is that there's a bonus of fragrance if you rub the leaves in the summer. And it likes full sun and average to moist, well-drained soil. When we talk about pops of color, we talk color throughout the whole, all three seasons, spring, summer, fall. And we'll start off first with the spring ephemerals, and these are the plants which pop up and then have their blooming, die back, and basically disappear. And they're useful to provide early color and can be planted close or under shrubs and those types of plants, which will flower later, go into leaf later, and will disappear, so that it provides a useful tool for providing some early color. This is a part of my my scree garden in my backyard, and I've got some iris or chives here, some dianthus, cheddar pinks. We've got some fox subulata, which is finished blooming, and I think they call it, another name is carpet phlox, and some rock soapwort, I'm sorry, and Saramaria joystick red. This provides early color, and there are some other plants in here which you are on the downside of the hill. One thing that I would get you to do is to don't let these chives go to seed, mainly because you'll be weeding out little chive plants till whatever. And it's even though they are attractive, removing the flower buds after they've faded will save you a huge amount of work. And they, even by cutting off the blooms, they won't bloom again this year. Early spring is that time when the snow is gone, the ground's warming up, and we see our first flowers. Bloodroot is an example of that type of plant, which is one of the first ones to break the soil in the spring and produce its flowers, which is such a welcome relief after months and months of snow and ice, and especially in Ottawa. And both of these types, this is the single variety on the left and the double on the right. And the single, unfortunately, only blooms for a day or two. And once the flower is fertilized, it drops its petals and goes into the seed producing mode. Whereas the double, because it doesn't produce any nectar, it's not attractive to the insects that would pollinate the single flowers. It'll last for possibly up to 2 weeks, depending on the weather and whatever. They are expensive, but I know that the OHA, the Ontario Horticulture Association AGM, is being held this year at the Bear Brook. Oh gee, I've forgotten the name of it. It's out in Canada, and I know that some of these double bloodroots will be on sale there. So if you're interested in those, you should make a point of coming to the AGM. I believe it's the 21st to the 24th, or 22nd to the 24th of July. Another early spring bloomer are the heathers, And this is an example of Calluna vulgaris and Erica carnea, which are commonly called heathers. One of the features, or one of the things that you need to be aware of with this plant, is that they should be pruned heavily after they flower. If you try to prune them in the fall, you're going to cut off the flowering buds for the next season. And if you prune them regularly and keep them to size, you might have to only divide them up every 5 or 6 years, and they'll certainly live a very long time. Lenten rose is another early blooming flower, and it doesn't lose its leaves over the winter. But what a lot of gardeners do is, as they see the flower buds starting to form in the early spring, what they'll do is they'll cut off the old flowering leaves, the old leaves from last year, so that you can see the flowers better. Hellebores historically have bloom with their flower heads pointing downward. So if you have some of the older or get hold of some of the older styles, you're best if you can plant them on a slight rise where you can see the flowers from below. But a lot of the, or at least some of the new varieties that are becoming available show that that flower right that looks up, so that you don't need to be so careful as to where you put them in the garden. And cutting off the old leaves doesn't hurt the plant at all, because they're sending up new growth, and those leaves would have died naturally as the time progressed through the year. The red wild columbine is a Canadian native plant, which blooms in the early spring, and it reaches a height of maybe 20 to 60 centimeters tall. Once it blooms, it'll keep a small place in the garden. It's not, but it provides a nice bright color in the spring, and it's not invasive or anything like that, although it will spread around slowly with the seeds that its fertilized flowers will generate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jack in the Pulpit. This is the pulpit over here, which is really not the flower, but what is rather called a spathe, S-P-A-T-H-E. And inside the spathe is where the flower exists and is. And the insects or the bees that pollinate this plant end up having to come into that spathe and down to the flower. And this is the kind of a little bit of color that you can see in the fall for an older bed, older for the year in the year's perspective. And I can add some color to the garden. They like partial to full shade and moist, well-drained soil. When we're looking at other pops of color, here's an example of a drumstick primula. And primulas are very, very hardy. It's amazing. A lot of the primula varieties that we grow were initially collected in the mountains, the Himalayas, and typically easily above 4,000 meters. So they're a very tough plant. In fact, they probably would have more difficulty if they're not kept, most of them like some moisture soil. And if they don't get that moist soil, that would be more of a problem with their surviving than the winter. But here's an example of a fringe bleeding heart. Now, this is the white variety versus the pink that I showed earlier on. And it has all the same attributes, as that the flowers are white instead of red. And here's a good combination of colors, a white, in the front and the back, and the soft green of the ostrich fern. Here's another example of a primula. This is the cowslip primula, and it's very tough and hardy. It blooms mid-May, I would say. And there are some varieties like the ones on the left that have a slightly, well, obviously a different color than the yellow, but they spread by vegetatively and also via some seeds, but they're very, very tough. I had some that escaped into my lawn, and they would flower before it was time to cut the lawn, and I would cut it all year, and the following year they would come up again. They were quite tough and tenacious plants. As I mentioned earlier, there's an example of the sweet Cape transcantia, this plant in the middle with the lovely blue flowers. And here's the yellow bright gold yew, which is unique in that the yellow will stay with the plant throughout the whole summer. And as opposed to, it's not just the yellow growth, that yellow stays with the plant. Slowly over the, towards the end of the year, it'll become green. And but for most of the summer, it's a bright yellow, as you see in the photo. And I've also got some Barbarius, which I'm reconsidering, considering it's now on, I guess, maybe not invasive plants, but certainly on some of the plants that can threaten some of our natives. And here's a daylily here and over here on the side. So it's this is an example of both the pops of color that you get later in the year, along with the whole idea of layering, where you've got the flowers growing over the smaller plants that grew earlier in the spring. Fox subulata is a mid-spring bloomer. It comes in reds, pinks, and mauves. It's easy to cut back. It likes full sun and average moisture, but it's easy to keep care of. And it's one of those plants that comes back year after year. And as long as you can meet the full sun and average moist conditions, it'll last for years. I know a lot of you might not think that forget-me-nots are a great plant, having had to remove them from your garden, but they always seem to find a place where, in my gardens anyway, where I haven't planted anything else, they add a little bit of color. They're attractive in the spring and they disappear. Not totally, but to small little rosettes of leaves later in the year, but they do well, and I like them, and they're not difficult to extract if they're growing where you don't want them. I mentioned earlier about the Corydalus ochloreuca, which is that one that would bloom for a long, long time. Well, this is the Corydalus solida. This is a variety called black currant, and it's one of the very few. It would be flowering very shortly after the oh my goodness, the bloodroot, and it's an ephemeral type of plant. It will bloom early, and then as the flowers die, the whole upper part of the plant dies. And it's at that time that if you wanted to spread some of those corms that are around that I mentioned are about the size of your thumb, they can easily be collected and put in another location. You can have that plant everywhere, and it's nice to have them at a place where they're growing will be covered by other plants. Irises are always bloom in June, and but over an extended period of time, and some will even bloom in earlier than that. I've got some that bloom in May that are very short. These are typically the taller varieties. We've got the Iris germanica, which is the this type of iris here, and this would be here, and these ones down here. This particular plant is Iris insata, which is a Japanese type of lilac, and Iris sibirica is this particular variety of the leaves are more like grass than they are the thick leaves on the German bearded irises. And they'll grow from varieties from 15 centimeters to to a meter tall. So, and they bloom at different times. So there's another plant that you can put into your garden to help with your garden design in terms of color and timing of bloom. I mentioned geraniums. The one on the left is Johnson's Blue, but over here we have big root geranium. I know most of you think of geraniums as liking sun and moisture, but the big root geranium will grow in full shade and with very little moisture or water. And it's a wonderful plant because it provides some green cover and prevents weeds from growing. It's worthwhile having if you have those kind of conditions which other plants won't grow in. The other type of geranium here is the geranium sanguineum, which is a pretty aggressive geranium. But one of the things that you can do is, opposed to having to dig it up and cut the roots off, if you can remove the side shoots, which without having to dig up the plant, which allow it to be a bit more confined in your garden space. And it's not as much effort required as it would in your with the work that you're doing. Peonies are for June. This is peony tenafolia, and we've got this one, which is hot primavera, is this one, and this is hot chocolate. But they bloom regularly, and they're very long lived plants. I think the key thing is, if you're going to transplant these, is to make sure that the flowering buds that'll appear in the fall, is to make sure you plant them no deeper than 2 inches in the soil, and up to, make sure they're at 2 inches, because higher than that they won't bloom, lower than that they won't bloom. And these are just a wonderful plant, and if a lot of the doubles are scented, and they're just gorgeous. Here's an example of some clematis. This is a clematis recta, which is in my garden, and this plant grows about maybe 1.5 to 2 meters in height. And what I tend to do is it's growing behind some big stones that were dug out when the pool in my backyard was put in, not by me, but by a previous owner. And what I do is I'll push and bend those clematis recta over, so it's almost like a waterfall. You've got some lovely colors in lilies and some daylilies. This is Becky Shasta daisy. This is a wonderful example of a peony and Ibis versicolor. It just, from my point of view, it really represents the gardens in June with that lovely combination of the pink and the mauve, or the blue. Here's another example of, and here's using a Johnson's Blue geranium in this photo, along with some the gas plant, Dictymus alba, that is also very, very long lived and will bloom for a month type of thing, but it'll live 35, 40 years. And this is a clematis. Instead of growing it up on a trellis, I have it partially up, but then it tends to run down and provides a nice flow of white blooms during the summer. I'm not sure if many of you still grow lilies, and one of the reasons why you might not is because of the problems with the red lily beetle. I was fortunate enough about 5 years ago or more now to have access to some parasitic wasps that attack the red lily beetle. And in my garden last year, I still continue to grow lilies. And last year I had 1 red lily beetle that I found. So I think those wasps are working, and hopefully they'll spread to an area near Ottawa South over a short period of time, because they'll spend about 1 kilometer a year. So I think from where I live in Barhaven to Ottawa South, maybe 10 to 15 kilometers. So hopefully if you still have a problem with them, you may get them, you may not have them shortly. Roses are wonderful. The rose on the left was an 1812 rose that was designed and developed strictly for the anniversary of the 1812-1814 rose. Ottawa is also the home of the Explorer Rose series that was developed over many years. It's a wonderful rose. They're very hardy. They don't need to be protected. I think the only shortcoming is that they would only bloom once a year. Now, some people tend to grow, will try to grow hybrid tea roses, and they require a lot of effort with respect to protection, both from fungus and insects and the cold winters. And people have been successful in growing them, but they take a lot of work. Now, the advantage is that they do bloom all summer. So, you know, it may be something you want to consider, but if that's too much for you, then certainly the Explorer roses are a wonderful rose that you can have in your garden. This is a banana cream, which is a type of Shasta daisy, a new type, and it is blessed, and you can see in the photo all the extra buds that are on this particular plant, and it blooms all summer. It starts out lemony yellow, the leaves or the petals, and they turn to white. It's a wonderful example of providing that little bit of color in your garden throughout the summer. Delphiniums. Now, delphiniums tend to be relatively short-lived plants unless you divide them regularly, probably every couple of years. But having said that, this particular delphinium, which is growing in Candace's garden, is 15 years old and has not had any significant maintenance and still thrives, as you can see in this photo. Another good example is the threadleaf tickseed. It'll grow, maybe 90 inches tall and 60 centimeters wide or thereabouts. And it's once established, it's very tolerant of low moisture, and it's a wonderful plant to have in a nice sunny location. Monarda or bee balm, bergamot, oswego tea, all the same thing. And I know a lot of people have given up growing these because many of the early varieties were either too aggressive and spread too quickly, or were very susceptible to powdery mildew. However, I know that having subscribed to Fine Gardening, that a test trial was done, maybe 5-10 years ago. And they basically listed all the various types of Monarda that's out there and how well they do against powdery mildew and how aggressive they are. So if you can get a copy of that particular version of the magazine, you can select the variety you want. The other interesting thing about a Monarda is that it's the flavor that's used that you get when you brew Earl Grey tea. Towards the end of the summer, a lot of the clematis have finished blooming. However, one that blooms in September is Mrs. Robert Bryden, which is a lovely climbing clematis. It has just a myriad of foliage, and attracts, as you can see, attracts insects. It's a lovely plant. It's something that you certainly would like to have or should like to have in your garden. In September and October are times for asters, although a lot of those taxonomists are giving them, because of the use of DNA information, have divided the asters up into different genuses. This is Xylophyotrichum cortifolium, which is really the North American aster or wood aster, and the Symphyotrocum novae anglii is commonly referred to as the New England aster. But these are lovely plants. They can grow tall, and if you bud them back up until about the middle of July, you can reduce the height if that becomes a problem and they fall over. But to my experience is, as long as they get lots of sun and a good amount of moisture, let them dry out too much, they're able to stand on their own right through the end of the fall. This is Anemone tomentosa, which this is the pink variety. I know it doesn't show terribly pink here, but it's a good plant, but it spreads quite, I'd say quite aggressively. So if you put it in a spot in your garden, make sure that you provide some type of protection around the roots so that it doesn't, because that's how it spreads. It's via its roots. But it blooms in September when not a lot is, and they're very, very good cut flowers. But to just be aware of this particular variety. Another variety which is much, much more better behaved is the Honorine Jobert, and it throws up lovely white flowers in October when there's not much else blooming. And once again, as with the other anemone, this provides lots of good cut flowers. This particular plump, excuse me, is 7 years old and requires a minimum of maintenance. The other types of things that you might want to consider planting are colchicum, which sometimes is referred to as an autumn crocus, or in fact, there are real autumn crocuses. This being an example here is Crocus pucellum, which will bloom in October. Both of these crocus, or both of these plants, are unique in the sense that they bloom without the flower, without the leaves, and the leaves will appear in the spring. Then they'll die back, and you'll get the flowers appearing again in the fall. The crocus aren't much of a problem with their leaves because they're very small and thin, whereas the colchicum will have bigger leaves. So you might want to decide when you plant it to have something that would slightly distract from the fact that the leaves are going to turn yellow and die in the spring. I think one of the last plants is the Japanese toad lily. And this is a unique, lovely plant. The flowers are small. Once again, it's blooming in the late fall, and when not much else is blooming, and it's very delicate, very attractive plant. And most of the Japanese toad lilies will bloom in the fall. They're either burgundy to purple with white spots or purple spots. There is a yellow variety, Tricertus latifolia, and it blooms in July or late June, July, to confuse us all with respect to when the Japanese toad lily blooms. This is a New England aster, Adenum anelma pochke, and it's a beautiful aster that reaches a meter in height. As you can see, it attracts lots of insects, and it's a good plant for the back of the border. It likes full sun or semi-shaded, but it throws up a huge amount of bloom, and it's very tough and hardy. It's worthwhile having it for adding color in the fall. Other ways you can get color are through summer bulbs, such as begonias, canna lilies, calla lilies, or annuals, or some flowering shrubs, but we don't have time today to talk about those. But you know, once the leaves and the trees start to fall, the fall adds another degree of color to our gardens. And Albert Camus once said that in the fall, every leaf becomes a flower, but that's another topic. So other resources, if you're looking to find information about when plants bloom, Landscape Ontario at this site will provide lots of information on a month-by-month basis. Ontario Wildflowers is a site that addresses wildflowers, and it's maintained by a fellow by the name of Andy Fayon, who lives in Ottawa. With respect to all the plant name changes, you might want to consider this RHS, which stands for the Royal Horticulture Society. Look, it's an organization in England, and it will contain information about what plant name changes are valid and all of that information. The other thing you can do is you can consider sending an email if you have questions about your plants to the Master Gardeners Helpline at mgoc_helpline@yahoo.ca. The advantage of that site is that we'll provide an answer within 24 hours, typically, and you can send photos to if you have a question about a plant or a weed or whatever. It's a wonderful place to collect information and get advice. And that's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. That was very, very informative, and your pictures are just amazing too. Like,
oh, thank
it
you.
was so easy to follow with the wonderful pictures that went along with it. And thank you for doing this, even though you went so far away, and still managed, and it saved us having to go out tonight, so that I didn't mind that at all.